Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil, Guillermo, your host for this behind-the-scenes look at PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. Here we talk to the key players at PETA and the movement and ask them about how animal rights change their lives and how they stay motivated to make the world a better place for animals. On this episode, how PETA's activism has evolved from protest signs to working with companies directly in order to change their corporate heart and ethics.
A lot of these companies, if you ask them, they'll either deny it or say that they don't like working with us, but they rely on us. They call on us, they respond when we call, and we actually find that we agree on much more than we disagree. And interestingly, we've become a resource for many of these companies, and often I think we've become their conscience when it comes to animals.
And there's more about that Mohair investigation, first brought to the public by the Washington Post.
This was the first ever behind-the-scenes look at this industry, and what our eyewitness documented was truly horrifying. We found workers dragged, they roughly handled, they threw around and mutilated, and even cut the throats of fully conscious goats. Babies, kid goats, who were shorn for the first time, cried out in fear. I mean, they sound like children.
More on that with Tracy Reiman, who also talks about SeaWorld, glue traps, Angora, and more. But first, a podcast update. You'll recall that PETA asked for state racing officials to inspect the Kentucky Derby winner Justify after Justify came up lame after the race. They did, and they found that Justify had a bruised heel. Initially, it was thought to be a condition known as scratches, a skin rash on his left hind foot. The rash often appears when moisture or debris is trapped in the feathers of draft horses, causing minor inflammation. And of course, the muddy track at Churchill Downs on that Saturday, the first Saturday in may have contributed to that. The bruised heel is more significant, but was downplayed, and as we produce this, no decision has been made if Justify will run in the Preakness, which is the next Triple Crown race. For more and updates, see the notes for today's show. I also want to thank you all for being part of our growing audience on the PETA Podcast. After just 3 months, we're one of the fastest growing podcasts around, sharing stories about the issues you care about. To help us, please go to the podcast notes and fill out the brief survey. It'll help us grow the podcast. You can also send a link of the show to your friends and let them know the animals have a voice on the PETA Podcast. And if you missed it, catch up on our past shows, including Episode 1 and Episode 14 with PETA President and co-founder Ingrid Newkirk, and see what happens when you Google Ingrid these days. Check out all the links on this podcast player or on PETA.org or wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out all our previous episodes, and if you're on an Apple device, please rate and review. It lets Apple know you care about the PETA Podcast. And here's a reminder, you can always give an immediate boost to the campaigns discussed here on the podcast by visiting PETA.org/donate. If you have Amazon's virtual assistant Alexa, you can instantly support any podcast topic and all of PETA's work for animals by saying, "Alexa, donate to PETA." And now for Tracy Reiman, Executive Vice President of PETA. When I first met Tracy 26 years ago, I knew her to be a bold, idealistic activist. Her methods are now slightly more refined as PETA has evolved to working from the picket lines to behind the scenes to get corporations to end animal cruelty. I talked to her recently about the new Angora investigation and how activists and companies reacted. And we talked about other companies they've contacted, like Tesla, SeaWorld, and others. I've known Tracy for a long time, but this was the first time we really chatted at length in quite a while. Here's my conversation with Tracy Reiman, PETA's Executive Vice President, on the PETA Podcast.
It's funny, it's been a long time, but it doesn't feel like that to me.
Yeah, right.
But we love that you're doing this. It's so exciting. I'm just, it's been something I know Ingrid really wanted to do for a long time, and I was really keen too. So it's just great that we finally found a way to make it happen.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, I've enjoyed doing it because I know a little bit more about what my spouse is doing for most of her life.
Yep.
So that's good. That's good. And
yeah.
It's also strengthened my sense of veganism. I mean,
yeah.
We got this air fryer recently, And
Uh-huh.
boy, what a godsend the air fryer is. I think
Oh, well, I'll
everyone
have to
should.
investigate that.
Yeah, you can make your own kale chips that are better than the kale chips you'd buy because you don't need to make them with oil. I mean, if you do it with an air fryer, just throw in some nutritional yeast, and it's
My
crispy. It's
favorite. Mm-hmm.
yeah, no oil. It tastes cheesy enough, right? And
Totally.
it's good. So
I'm down.
I'm paying it forward. You're the air fryer, the air fryer.
Awesome.
All right. Okay. So look, let me begin here. First of all, Executive Vice President, congratulations. I
Thank
never
you.
really got to say that formally. And, you know, I've known you for a while because of, my association through my wife, Kathy at PETA. And boy, it's been a long time, not, I guess it's sort of been uphill, but not nearly as steep as you'd think, but still steep. After
Yes.
all these years, what are your thoughts now? You're no longer, well, you're still the activist, but a different kind of activist as executive vice president. But what are your thoughts after all these years? Or how closer is PETA to the goal that it wants to achieve?
In looking back over the 26 years that I've been with PETA, the last few have been just tremendous. The day I got the call saying that Ringling Brothers was going to stop dragging elephants across the country, I thought it was an Onion story because I couldn't believe it was finally happening after all of these years. But it was, and I went to my son's bedroom and woke him up because we're here in Los Angeles, so the news had been out, and told him because he's been protesting by my side at Ringling Brothers circuses since he was a tiny child. And we celebrated that moment together. And I think, that was sort of the beginning of the end of the use of animals in entertainment. And I think a real sign of changing times. Another example, 25 years ago, I remember protesting outside the National Aquarium in Baltimore when they got dolphins for the first
Mhm.
time to keep captive. And we were on boats outside the aquarium with signs and banners and urging them not to do it. And here just last year, the National Aquarium made the decision to send all of their dolphins to sea sanctuaries because it was the right thing to do. And now, of course, Ringling Brothers is off the road altogether. They've shut down. So, I think these are great indicators of a time that we are now in, that just explosion of vegan foods that are available from Los Angeles to New York and everywhere in between.
Right.
It's just, there's so many indicators of the changing time. So I think, we're really in a whole new world now than we were back when I started at PETA.
One of the things that it seems that PETA is doing more of is that it's going right to where maybe change is most likely to happen. That's when you really approach corporate divisions of companies that may have been perpetrators of all the wrongs, and you're getting them to change their mind and their approach. So tell me about how that came about. And now that you're executive vice president, how do you lead the charge to change in that corporate way, the kind of changes that we ultimately see in our lives?
Yeah, well, we have a corporate affairs division. Most people don't even know it exists. But we have a whole team of corporate negotiators who are working behind the scenes with companies. And the goal is to form strong and positive relationships in order to move them away from cruel practices like not selling fur or down feathers or not promoting the circus or SeaWorld or not selling glue traps, any number of things. And we're seeing phenomenal progress. Much of the work that we do in this department, no one ever even hears about. Changes that are being made at the corporate level are happening all the time, and they have been for years. Many of them you do hear about, but there are so many that you never even hear about. And the vast majority of the work that's being done with companies is done privately, it's cooperatively, and very productively. We've developed solid relationships with many of the world's largest companies. They may not admit it, and that's okay. But
really, they don't come out publicly about it.
No, a lot of these companies, if you ask them, they'll either deny it or say that they don't like working with us, but they rely on us. They call on us, they respond when we call, And we actually find that we agree on much more than we disagree. And interestingly, we've become a resource for many of these companies. And often, I think we've become their conscience when it comes to animals.
Well, name one company that's changed its mind and said, well, we don't acknowledge or confirm or deny any, contact with PETA. They took that stance, but then they publicly acknowledge. Is there a company like that you can say?
I think there's probably quite a few.
Tell me one company that openly has embraced PETA's, advances and has worked together to change something.
Inditex is a great example of a company. Most people know them in America as the owner of Zara, which is a clothing brand. It's the largest clothing retailer in the world. And, we've been working with them behind the scenes. They were one of the companies that banned Angora, which is a horrific, done horrifically by ripping the fur out of rabbits while they're still alive, screaming in pain. That they banned Angora in all of their stores, and they've taken other steps to reduce the suffering of animals, to stop sourcing materials where animals are suffering. And at first they were very reluctant, but after working with us, meeting with us, coming to our offices here from Spain, they have been very supportive openly about the relationship with us. And there are many others just like that. Another great example is Tesla. We had written to Tesla a couple of years ago to say, your whole point is to be environmentally productive by having electric vehicles, and yet you use leather in every one of your cars. They didn't really respond to us, so we went to their shareholder meeting and asked a question during the Q&A portion of the meeting. And Elon Musk, the owner of Tesla, responded, and he said, we'll look into that. And the next day, we got a call from someone at the company. We began a relationship, and not 6 months later, they had their first car with vegan leather. And now just a year or so later, they don't use any leather in any of their cars anymore. So I think that was a great example of a reluctance and then an embracing of the philosophy, and then really taking quick, decisive action to eliminate cruelty.
Tell me, Tracy, do you think companies try to take advantage of PETA knowing that if they work with PETA, that'll help them? Or do you think they would have changed anyway? Or what do you think their approach is? Or do they come from a position of, say, good-heartedness, or are they just strictly looking at the bottom line?
It often depends on the individual. Whenever we have an undercover investigation, we immediately reach out to all the companies that are sourcing whatever the material is. Some people respond very quickly. If the person is sympathetic in some way or is somehow moved by what we send them, they'll respond. Others respond out of fear. They're afraid of what we might do if they don't. And others just finally respond because we're relentless in our pursuit of communication with them. And yet still there are some who don't respond, and we have to, ask our members to write and weigh in so that they can see that it's not just PETA, but, thousands, if not millions of people who agree with us on these types of issues. So typically it's not out of the, goodness of their heart. But I think that many have come around to that, because now, after many years of writing about fur and about the cruelties of the wool industry or Angora or leather or crocodile skins, I think that we've just beat them over the head so many times that they have, they're starting to see, okay, there really is no way to have a sweater or a jacket or a purse that's cruelty-free. And now, of course, one of our approaches is always, that we always say what's bad and then what you can do about it. So we're always promoting the alternatives to leather, to wool, to down. And there are many, and there are new ones coming all the time. We hear about pineapple leather. We hear about grape leather most recently.
Grape leather?
Grape leather.
Really?
They are finding ways to make leather out of pretty much everything these days.
So you can stomp the grapes up in the Napa Valley with your grape leather shoe.
Absolutely, you can. So it's just, there's so many ways, new materials that are available these days, new innovative materials, and they really like that. So I think a lot of them are starting to stretch themselves a bit and look at what the other options are, and then starting to incorporate those.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the power of PETA supporters, and when you call to action, people respond, and then the companies see that they get the emails, thousands of emails over a short period of time. That's really, would you say that's real? I mean, there's the moral argument, of course, but don't you think that the power of PETA is that PETA's understood that there are so many more people who have adopted the values and the morals of the company, of the ethical treatment of animals? The power
Absolutely.
of the email list, the power of people just to speak up, right? That's what the companies fear the most.
We have the best activists, supporters, and members in the world. We tell them about the cruelty, for instance, of Mohair, which is an investigation we just broke, and they write in droves. Tens of thousands of people will write within just a matter of days, and sometimes more than that, because they feel so strongly about these issues. And it wakes up companies. We had one company tell us a couple of days ago, they called the company who does our email to ask if they had been put on some kind of spam list because they couldn't believe how many emails they had gotten about a particular issue. But no, they were real emails from real individuals. So I think that, our activists are wonderful and so helpful and changing the course of history for animals through companies and that kind of thing. But also, protest, the power of protest cannot be understated. Companies do not like to see people with protest signs and graphic photos and video outside their stores. And so I think, the protest continues to be a very important part of our work. And I think in our corporate affairs division, we do everything we can to work with a company behind the scenes to move them away from cruel practices. When we hit a wall and they've done as much as they seem like they're going to do, we turn it over to our campaigns department, who start to do protests and other things like that. And that often brings them back to the table.
Yeah. So the cardboard sign or the protest sign and the people in human chains around the building still feared, but may not be the first approach.
Definitely. We will write to every company before we start protesting them or doing an action alert or anything like that. We give them more than ample opportunities to engage with us, not even necessarily do the right thing initially, but even just engage with us. And, we want to work with them. We want to help them understand and help them see what the alternatives are and how they can change and benefit animals. And many do. Some of them don't, and then they become the target of a campaign. But they almost always come around eventually. It's just how much do they want to endure before that happens?
Yeah. All right. So you mentioned a couple of times, and I didn't go into it right away because I wanted to get into these other areas. But you've mentioned the investigation of the mohair industry, and it broke in the Washington Post recently. It was an eyewitness investigation. Tell us about that investigation. What is mohair? And because I know it is wool, right? Mohair wool. But what is it? And what did the investigation expose about the mohair industry?
Yeah, I mean, mohair is a material, a fiber that's used in sweaters mostly. And it's become more and more prominent of late as companies are more uncomfortable using wool after we've done more than 7 undercover investigations into the cruelty of the wool industry. And of course, this was the first ever behind the scenes look at this industry. And what our eyewitness documented was truly horrifying. We found workers dragged, they roughly handled, they threw around and mutilated, and even cut the throats of fully conscious goats, babies, kid goats. Who were shorn for the first time cried out in fear. I mean, they sound like children. So human children. So it's really upsetting to see this. Some of the shearers lifted the goats off the floor by the tail, which would likely break them at the spine. They threw animals across the wooden floor. They hauled them around by their legs. It was just a horror show. And of course.
And these are goats primarily. I mean, the wool industry, I guess that we're talking about sheep, right? But these
Right.
the mohair comes from goats.
Yes, they're Angora goats. And the South Africa is the world's top producer of mohair, and that's where we investigated. We went to 12 different Angora goat farms to document the cruelty and found cruelty at every single one. It was really a shocking look at this industry that no one really has known much about, and yet many of these companies have started incorporating mohair more into their product lines, but not anymore.
Yeah, but there's no question they could do it better. They could do it more humanely, right? Or with less cruelty, no doubt.
Well, we don't believe so. In fact, we've investigated on wool farms, for instance, a number of farms where suppliers say it is quote unquote humane or responsible. But at the end of the day, when you are mass producing a product where an animal is involved, there's always going to be suffering. So you can take a number of steps to reduce the suffering, certainly, but you cannot eliminate it. There's no way. And at the end of the day, no animal wants to be taken to a slaughterhouse and killed simply for their skin or their wool or their fur. So there's really nothing you can do. The best thing that companies can do is to start producing sweaters and other products without the use of animals, with alternative materials, which are plentiful these days. And the best thing people can do is to just, when they look on that label and it says mohair or it says wool, don't buy it.
I guess this would apply to other materials from animals. And I'm speaking specifically about something that came up in a conversation with a friend. He wanted to buy a down pillow for a friend or a down coat. And he asked me, well, don't the animals survive? I mean, he made it sound like the animals are plucking out their feathers and handing them to the supplier, but that's not necessarily true either. I mean, it's not like a regenerative kind of thing, and it's not done humanely. I mean, would you say the same thing that you just said about goats and sheep applies to, say, duck down and goose down, that kind of thing?
Absolutely. I mean, what we know, and we've done a number of investigations as well into the down industry, and most down feathers are plucked from birds who are still alive in a horrific procedure. They basically hold the goats down with their legs or arms, or sit on their necks and literally rip the feathers out. This is a horrific procedure, and it can be done numerous times before the geese are then slaughtered. And for those who say they don't use live plucked down, well, these animals are still kept in confinement. They're raised in atrocious conditions, and they too are sent to slaughter, where they are often killed while they're fully conscious. So there's again no way to get down humanely, but there are many alternatives. And back to the corporate work, we've been working behind the scenes with companies like the North Face for many years now to really push them to focus their research and development on non-animal down options. And they've done that. They're now selling a number of different, as are Patagonia and other companies, a number of different high quality non-down jackets, and they're promoting them that way. So we're seeing a real big change in the outdoor industry in terms of moving away from down and towards these more innovative materials that keep you just as warm. They can get wet. They are often lighter and frankly cheaper.
Yeah. And so if you're wearing down, you're wearing cruelty. And
absolutely
the same message goes with mohair wool. If you're wearing, and I think this is what I was getting at, that there really is no way to make it humane. It's just a cruel practice, and it has to end. I mean, there's no.
It does, and another very good example of this is, when we had done our Angora investigation into Angora rabbits, there was one really big company, an international company, who didn't want to believe that their suppliers were doing this. They had auditors who visited their farms, who assured them that it was all humane. Well, we convinced them to take us with them on some unannounced audits of their farms in China. And what they found was horrifying. It was everything that we had documented, and in some cases, worse. And the same auditor who had assured them that everything was fine was along with us, and was clear that he either chose not to see what was right before his eyes or just couldn't, because he has no experience working with animals, although frankly, it wouldn't take anyone who does to see the cruelty right before you. But needless to say, they banned Angora after that visit. But I think it was a real big lesson that, these companies that say that they have auditors who check out their farms, it's a total sham. It is for their protection. It is not for the animals' protection. Every time we've been to a farm that says that they are quote unquote humane or responsible, we found all number of cruelties. So you can't trust these labels. They're sham labels. The best thing that people can really do is just to not buy those products that come from animals at all.
All right. So Angora from Angora rabbits, that was bad, and things are changing there. This recent eyewitness investigation on the mohair industry that just broke in the Washington Post. What's it going to do to the mohair industry with these goats? Are they going to stop the cruelty to the goats? You described the appalling video. What did you do next, and what do you think is going to happen next?
Well, before we actually launched the investigation publicly, we decided to go to a number of the top retailers in the world, companies that we've been working, as I said, behind the scenes with for many years, to show them the footage and to ask them to ban it, because there's no way that it can be done humanely. And we were really excited to see that Inditex, which owns Zara, the largest retailer in the world, H&M, Gap, which also owns Banana Republic, Arcadia Group, which owns Topshop, which is massive internationally, Express, Anthropologie, Overstock. There are many companies, they all banned it completely. So our hope is that this industry just goes away, and that those who work on these farms and those who are in this industry, they move into another industry where they can be successful without causing suffering to animals.
Yeah, I remember in high school, I was with some very stylish folks in my neighborhood in San Francisco, and they liked the singing group The Temptations, and they would always wear these mohair pants, and they had different colors. They had like purple mohair and lime green mohair. And as I recall, mohair was kind of a scratchy fabric. I didn't see the appeal to it, but that was the thing to wear in high school. Mohair, matching mohair orange pants with an orange shirt.
I'm glad that's gone out of style.
It has gone out of style. Well, let's hope that it goes out of
style.
Yeah. Well, let's just hope it goes out of style finally now in 2018. I mean, now that you have the goods and you're starting to see some change, and of course the people responded, right? I mean, when you put out alerts, I mean, there's still alerts that people can do to convince the companies that mohair is bad?
Yeah, we've turned our attention now to Forever 21, which is a youth-focused brand. They are still selling Angora and so far have refused to stop. So we have an action alert on our website, and I encourage people to go and take action there. And if we turn them, which I hope we do, that we'll pick another one until we've done like we've done with Angora rabbits, where most retailers aren't selling it at all anymore.
And tell me about the corporate work that your corporate division does. Does it extend to other campaigns, like the SeaWorld campaign is ongoing, ending the Iditarod? Tell me what the corporate division is doing on there.
We've been very successful in convincing companies to stop promoting SeaWorld. I mean, there's almost no one who does that anymore. So we continue to push any company that seems to want to promote SeaWorld to stop doing that. We have this year been very focused on the Iditarod, which is this horrific race in Alaska where dogs are forced to run nearly 1,000 miles in around 10 days. More than 350 dogs had to be pulled off the race this year because they were too sick or injured to continue to the end. More than 150 have died in the history of the Iditarod. It's time for it to end. So we've been really working to convince sponsors of that race to pull out, and we were pleased this past year to convince a number of massive companies, State Farm, Guggenheim, and Wells Fargo, which was the premier sponsor of the race. They've all pulled out. We're still pushing a couple of others, Coca-Cola and Jack Daniels, to name just a couple. It is the local bottler and a local retailer, but it's got the company's logo there. They're connected, and they need to stop that. So we're really urging people to do that. We work on glue traps, trying to convince companies to both stop selling them, but also to get entities to stop using them. And of late, we've convinced more than 100 airports to not use glue traps after contacting them. The most recent one was New Orleans. So you can rest assured when you're flying through New Orleans that there are no glue traps being used there, where mice run across these sticky traps and become completely stuck, and many of them die of dehydration or starvation, or from bleeding from trying to free themselves from these horrific little traps.
They were using them in New Orleans, huh?
They were, and at many other airports as well. And there are other entities too, schools and hospitals, and they're used all over the place. So, we get calls all the time from people saying they see one. We say, well, pick it up. Don't leave it there first and foremost. And then we'll contact whoever it is and urge them to not use these horrific glue traps. And often people do. They really just don't realize or don't understand, or, Home Depot recently decided to stop using them after they were faced with having to deal with a mouse they found in a trap. While we were talking to them about this issue, one was reported there, and they said, well, we euthanized the mouse. And we said, well, how exactly did you do that? And they would never or could never explain how they did that. And I think being forced to see what what actually means for an animal who's stuck in a trap. It's not just chuck them in the trash and hope, make it go away. And that really made them sort of take a fresh look at the use of glue traps in their stores. So that was a very exciting turn of events.
Tell me also about SeaWorld. I know that's an ongoing thing. They've just replaced the CEO. New CEOs come on. What's the ongoing concern with PETA in terms of in terms of shutting down the operation?
I think it's just a matter of time. One of these days soon, I'll wake up just like he did with Ringling Brothers and think there's an Onion story saying that SeaWorld is sending all their animals to sea sanctuaries. But we were able to force them to stop breeding orcas a couple of years ago because public opinion was so behind us after the release of the film Blackfish, and after a number of deaths at their amusement parks. We've kept the pressure on. I think losing sponsors and our public education campaign to show people that orcas and other animals don't belong in these tiny tanks swimming in circles day after day. It's really hit a nerve with people, and fewer people are going every year, and they're losing a lot of money. They're losing their CEO and many of their long-term employees. I really think it's just a matter of time because people don't want to support this kind of abuse anymore. I think with animals in entertainment, we have hit a tipping point. People are ready to stop. They don't like to see animals being used and abused. They understand what it means behind the scenes. It used to be you see elephants in circus and you think, oh, they're fine. But now people really know that in order to get them there, to force them to do these things, to force orcas to do the things that they do, there's something that has to make that happen. They don't just do it because they want to. And we really have, I think, gotten to a place where people are ready to accept that and move on and do something else. Interestingly, here in LA, the only billboards you ever see for SeaWorld now are about their roller coaster rides or their events. You don't see any orcas or other animals on their billboards because they know people aren't going to go there for that reason. And that's what we encourage them to do. Have SeaWorld without animals. You can do so many wonderful, innovative things. You can educate people, actually educate them about all the wonderful sea life without hurting them. And I think it's just a matter of time before that happens.
All right, Tracy, I want to thank you for taking the time. I've known you quite a while, and I know that it hasn't always been, a glorious thing, to keep fighting uphill. And I imagine as the executive vice president, you must have some kind of technique to keep you going, to keep you from just falling from this, from the stress, or, they're not all victories. It's always tough. I mean, is there something you do to stay motivated, to keep you going, to remind you that it's not a forever cruel world, that things can change?
Yeah, well, it helps that I am an endlessly optimistic person by nature. But I definitely have my moments where I break down. I mean, the suffering we see every day is sometimes too much to take, but we are making so much progress, and I just keep my eye on the prize, and that's what I urge everybody else to do. And we do see so much progress, and we get emails every day from people who have gone vegan. They've stopped going to SeaWorld. They've decided they're not going to wear those leather shoes anymore. They aren't going to buy cruel products that have been tested on animals. I see all these things and it gives me hope. We're making progress every day, more and more every day. And I just have to remind myself, somebody's got to do this. And I would rather do it with PETA and our take no prisoners approach than anywhere else. And I just urge anyone out there who does feel despondent to look at our website. We post our victories all the time. We have a video every month that talks about some of the big progress that we're making. Stay connected to see that progress, and you too will be invigorated to continue on every day.
Tracy Reiman, Executive Vice President of PETA. Hey, thanks for being with us, Tracy, on the PETA Podcast.
Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure.
Tracy Reiman, Executive Vice President of PETA, on making corporations and their products cruelty-free. And that breakthrough Angora investigation. Find out more about that. See the pictures yourself at PETA.org. And take action against Forever 21. That's a real thing. Go to PETA.org. You can contact me on amok.com. Once again, thank you for listening. Go to our podcast player and fill out the survey. It's feedback that'll help us grow the show. And don't forget to share a link with friends and let them know there's a voice for the animals on the PETA Podcast. Once again, you can always give an immediate boost to the campaigns we discussed by visiting PETA.org/donate. If you have Amazon's virtual assistant Alexa, you can instantly support us and any podcast topic. All of PETA's work, simply by saying, Alexa, donate to PETA. Our music is provided by CarbonWorks. Check them out on YouTube. And once again, thank you for joining us. Join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.